Karasik. Today we are joined by Derek Fournier, aka Old School, one of the hosts of the What the Buck podcast, the longest running Buccaneers podcast on the interwebs. Welcome to the show, Derek. We had you on a couple of years ago, and it's good to have you back.
Hey, my pleasure to come on, man. I had fun the last time. Looking forward to this time as well.
All right, Derek, you and Scott were getting into it before we started recording, but I'll start you off with the hard question. Why does it always seem like whenever the Bucs have high expectations going into the season, they find a way to disappoint us? Or you, I guess.
Well, yeah, as a Bucs fan, I'd say it's not limited to when we have high expectations. They have disappointed us more often than not as a franchise. But, you know, the high expectations this year all came around having what we thought is, and I happen to still believe can be a franchise quarterback, and having Coach Cutter here in his second year after being his offensive coordinator as well. The belief that this was a team that was on the rise and had gone out and got some weapons for him with Deshaun Jackson coming in here, continuing to draft talent that I thought was going to come in, and having a defense that was allegedly resurgent after a good 5-game streak at the end of last year being led by Mike Smith. And sadly, what we've seen on the field and what is reflected in our record is a team that can't really stop anyone on defense, certainly not on third down, and an offense that can't consistently do anything, certainly not in the first half. And the result of that is a really crappy record. I'd like to say it's because there's some sort of otherworldly curse, but that wouldn't help because I can't fix that either. So
I think it just comes down to incompetence at a lot of levels. Bad teams are bad because they find ways to lose. They find ways to hurt themselves. They find ways to shoot themselves in the foot. As we spoke about before the show, the 2-5 record in close games doesn't help out any bit. And it's a lot of just finding ways to lose. And when you look at who the Bucs even beat, like the Giants, the Bears, the Jets, the Dolphins, you're not talking the cream of the crop here that they've somehow managed ways to beat.
Yeah, it's always tough when you do that, compare who you win and who you lose against, because the Dolphins go out and beat the Patriots, which doesn't make any sense, right? But I understand exactly what you're saying. The Giants are terrible for sure. But the point about finding ways to lose, that's exactly the way Bucs fans feel right now. My dad used to say for years, defeat from the jaws of victory. When the team is able to get a lead, the defense can't hold on to it. And conversely, when we have a chance to put points on the board, we tend to fail. You look last week, 5 turnovers against the Lions. The defense played well enough, even though it's not a very good defense right now, and it's decimated and unable to get to a quarterback. The offense couldn't do anything. You drive up and down the field and couldn't score. Green Bay the week before that, I was up in Lambeau Field, which was a lot of fun. We doubled them up in every stat that you keep, except for the score, which is the only one that really matters. So it's just ineptitude across the board, and the kicker fiasco didn't help either. Luckily, we've gone back to Pat Murray, who we never should have really gone away from. But, at this point in the season, it's just a matter of trying to find the pieces you're going to continue moving forward. And to be honest, everyone's under evaluation all the way up to and including the coaches and staff.
Now, on that note, Derek, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on sort of the coaches? Derek Cutter has been on a ever increasingly hot seat, and a lot of people are speculating that he will get fired at the end of the season. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that, and what are what has been your thoughts about Mike Smith's performance as the defensive coordinator in Tampa?
I think they share a similar inability or unwillingness to modify what they'd like to do. At times, I think Dirk Cutter has a game plan that he wrote 4 weeks ago for the team we're going to face, and people script 15 plays of the first drive and this sort of thing. I get the feeling sometimes Dirk scripts entire games and just says, the hell with whatever I see on the field, we're going to run these plays because I like these plays. And Mike Smith, decimated by injuries or their inability or unwillingness to go out and get more talent at different points, even when he sees some limited success with a 3-man front, is afraid of giving up the big play so much that he doesn't play press that you'd have to do to run that. So they both seem very stuck in their ways despite knowing a lot about football. I saw it in training camp with Coach Cutter as well, a temperament issue, and I don't know if you guys saw it when he was there. Dirk has a very Belichickian, let's call it, gruff attitude at times when people ask him questions he doesn't like. And that works well when you win, right? People forgive almost anything when you're winning. But when you start losing, it wears thin quickly, and that's what's happened down here. I'm a guy who thinks coaches in the NFL should get 5 years. I think it takes a while and some permanence to build a program. I know that's not an in vogue belief, and that's not what the NFL seems to do now. And the Bucs change coaches like underwear. So I do believe that the coaching staff is going to get recycled this offseason. And I think that, to be honest, the GM is also at risk as well, Jason Light.
Oh, wow. I wouldn't have expected that because Jason Light, I feel, has brought a lot of talent in there. It's just they get injured all the time.
Yep. I don't disagree with you. I think he's done a surprisingly good job. And what you never know, and you guys probably see this at times as well, you don't know what he was told to go get for the cupboard, right? So you're not sure who's directing that, whether it's his vision or the coach's vision, what that ratio or balance of power is at times. I think Jason's done a good job. The thing that's been odd, and we've noticed as of late, Jason used to be very prominent and very public in his involvement, and he has stepped way back into the shadows. So it's interesting to me what's going on there. And then, of course, in Tampa, we love going in the Wayback Machine, which we did with Lovie Smith, and that didn't work, or it didn't work in 2 years, and they recycled him. And now with John Gruden coming Monday night, the reason it's going to be interesting, not because the Bucs have any overly legitimate chance of making this a game, even though somehow we managed to after given a ridiculous lead in Atlanta. It's John Gruden's going in our Ring of Honor there, and there's all kinds of rumors that are rampant in Tampa that Gruden wants to come back to coaching and he'd love to come back to Tampa, and the glory days are still in our recent memory. So there's all sorts of rumors and speculation around that about Tampa.
To be fair, the first time, the only reason why you made it a game was because Trufant got knocked out by our good friend Keanu Neal.
Yeah. Friendly fire hurt him, and then we couldn't even really take great advantage of that either. No, I agree. In that game, it was crazy. And there are a number of games like that where we were in them and you just didn't even know how. But yeah, no, that's a good point with Trufant.
But I mean, yeah, the Bucs are kind of rough right now. Now the Falcons didn't play Winston the first time.
Mm-hmm. Do
you think that's going to be a big thing? Like, do you think he's going to be due for a big game against the Falcons, even though he is missing, a good bit of the offensive line?
Well, it's amazing, and this goes to what we were just talking about with Derek Cutter. He's not getting much time to throw. He's running for his life, and it also means that, generally speaking, we're not running the ball well, though we did against Green Bay with Peyton Barber, who will assume the role of lead back, it appears, this week. Jameis is a different character than Ryan is. Like, Ryan is a patient journeyman guy. He's going to do what you're supposed to do, take what you give him. Jameis can put up huge numbers. He can be spectacular, but then you get bad Jameis. It's that mercurial thing where he has the equivalent of a butt fumble in Green Bay that gives him a score, stupid interceptions here and there. So I do think it's a different look for your Falcons defense to deal with, because the kid can throw into tight windows. He can be pretty spectacular, but we just don't know which one we're going to get with all that talent out there with Deshaun Jackson and Mike Evans and a lot of good tight ends and Godwin coming on pretty well. He's got weapons, but he sure as hell hasn't been able to use them to materialize it into points.
I'm curious sort of what your thoughts are with Jameis. He's had a bunch of good games against the Falcons. He seems to always play his best when he's facing the Falcons, for what much to the Falcon fans' chagrin. But I'm curious if you think, other than sort of the pendulum that tends to be Jameis Winston's play, is there anything that you're hoping the Bucs will be able to hang their hat on and sort of be able to, maybe the run game that's been struggling a little bit this year? Is there something that you're hoping to see from this Bucs offense, particularly this week, to see if they can sort of exploit the Falcons and attack the Falcons?
There's probably two things I'd like to see them do. One of them is, and we could discuss ad nauseum the disappointment of our offensive line. We were supposed to see development on our second-year guys, and Sweezy was supposed to be a huge upgrade, and none of that's true. And then with the two best offensive line we have, with Marpet and Dot both going out on injury, we're with a makeshift line. The thing the makeshift line can do intermittently is run block relatively well. They don't pass protect well. So I'd like to see them be able to try and run, but if Atlanta stacks the box a bit, I'd like Dirk to take what Atlanta gives them, and he has not done that, right? As opposed to other teams, and Matt Ryan, and I usually give quarterbacks the credit, even though it may be the coaching staff, it's tough to tell. But when we line up with, a soft zone or a 12-yard cushion on Julio, Matt's getting the ball to Julio or to anyone. Insert my name. I'm the receiver for Atlanta. You guys got a jersey that fit my big ass, right? So I go out there. You throw a smoke screen or, a now route or a quick slant to me when someone's in 12-yard cushion and starting in a back pedal. We don't. We have our receivers run to them. So if we would just start taking what teams give us, I think it'd be good. And that speaks directly to what you asked about Jameis as well. Jameis needs to stop thinking he has to do everything on his own. He has to go downfield every time, right? Make your reads, check down, take what the defense gives you, and live to fight another day. He tends to try and make everything happen, and quite often that everything is a bad thing.
Now, Derek, I'm curious, flipping sides to the defense. Gerald McCoy is now presumably out for the season with a torn biceps this late in the game. I would be shocked if he manages to play with that injury. But the Bucs pass rush has been a major disappointment this season. Is there really any chance, particularly this week, or any hope for you at least, that without Gerald McCoy, that the Bucs will be able to provide any pressure? Or do you feel like they need to be a little bit more aggressive, since they've already played conservative against Julio Jones and he tore them a new one? So maybe might as well throw it all at the wall and see what sticks by just dialing up the pressure maybe.
Yeah, it's funny. That's one of the huge disappointments as well. When we were off doing our joint training camp sessions with the Jaguars, the defensive line was running all over the place, and it was amazing. But with the dropping of the ends, who were the edge rush, we don't really have any threat on the line other than Gerald. With Gerald out, and I agree, I don't think he'll play again this season. It's a torn bicep. I don't think he's going to play. But even with Gerald in there, we haven't been able to get pressure. That hasn't been the magic that we need. So Mike Smith has to dial up 3-man fronts and bring extra pressure with the linebackers. And occasionally he likes to bring a safety in, which is dangerous. I'd like to see them be aggressive. It's not like we're fighting for a playoff game anyway. See if these guys can get to Matt, force a rush decision. He's a really good quarterback. He reads things well. His pre-snap reads are very good. He doesn't get flustered. I'm a huge fan of showing the blitz early and then rolling coverage to the hot, because quarterbacks are going to go to their instincts. But I just don't see us doing that sort of stuff often enough. It seems like playing close enough is what these guys think is good enough, and I think it's going to get them canned.
I think that was one of the issues that the Falcons faced, particularly in 2013. That was sort of the year that soured me on Mike Smith and company, where the Falcons dealt with a lot of injuries that year, and they really needed to basically change the way that they had to play in order to win games. And I think they sort of dialed down more on their sort of conservative, let's not, try to lose the game sort of approach. And it wound up costing them. They were, really struggled in the middle of that season until sort of Roddy White came back late in the year and really sort of turned around their offense. And all of a sudden they started winning some games late. But yeah, it's one of those things that issue that you just spoke about in terms of basically dialing in, doubling down on sort of being conservative and playing not to lose, kind of cost Mike Smith his job in Atlanta, and it sounds like it's probably going to cost him and Dirk Cutter the jobs in Tampa Bay.
That's certainly the way it looks now.
Now, we talked a little bit about Julio Jones. Do you feel like, they're going to do anything with Julio? Maybe like, is the over under, is it a win if you guys can keep him under 200 yards this week?
It's funny because even during the Atlanta game, there were people complaining about Julio going off for, I guess, 253 yards or something crazy. And back in the old days, because I am old, when Randy Moss was playing for Minnesota, we'd let Randy get his, right? That was not a big deal. We just didn't want anyone else to get theirs. So there's a strategy that allows Julio to go off and still be competitive, but we managed to forget the second part, because we didn't just let Julio go off. We pretty much let everybody go off. I'm not a guy that says you got to shut down just one guy. Julio's going to get his. He's a freak, man, in a very good way. Everyone in the league would like to have Julio wearing their jersey. But I do think they've got to do something like follow him around with Brent. Brent's been playing pretty good football. Brent Grimes. He's 1 trillion years old, but he still plays pretty good football. He physically doesn't match up very well with Julio, but he's smart. He's a cagey vet. I think he gives us a better chance. So, I mean, from a key to victory perspective, I hate to narrow it down to Julio. You guys have a fair number of weapons as well. So I think that the trick will be turnovers, as it usually is in football. The Bucs somehow have manufactured turnovers in games where they've been close. And if we can get Matty to turn the ball over or get fumbles, that's really the thing that's been good. Levante David is pretty good at punching the ball out of there. So is Quan. So ball security will be a big deal for Atlanta. If you guys protect the ball, I don't know that we have a very good shot against you.
Okay. Derek, is there any chance that we can get a possible prediction for this upcoming Monday night game?
Well, I'm superstitious, so I never predict against the Bucs. Which is why I also never bet on football, because I would be broke if I did that, because I would always bet for them. I think that the the team is playing for pride. They're playing at home. The defense, despite being injured and not particularly well coached or schemed, plays better at home. So I think you're going to see a game where if Jameis is good, Jameis, 27-17 score. I will, of course, say the Bucs are going to win that way, but I think it's probably more realistically that the Falcons will. I don't think it's going to be a blowout, though. We have certainly suffered blowouts at your hands at home before, and on a night where they're bringing Coach Gruden into the Ring of Honor, you can hear some embarrassing chants from the stands for any of the Bucs fans who still attend the game.
All right, Derek, we appreciate you coming back on the show. Let the people know where they can find you on Twitter and as well as your podcast.
Sure. I'm at What the Buck on Twitter, and we follow that moniker everywhere, facebook.com/whatthebuck. Our podcast is at whatthebuck.net. We're on all the normal podcast aggregation services, and we run a relatively straightforward show. We'll always talk about it from a Bucks perspective. We do a lot of film breakdowns, which I think you guys do a fair amount of too, which I appreciate because the game is way more complicated than the broadcast angle. But we're certainly a bit sour this year. It's been a year of disappointment, but any of you guys want to come over? We've had a great time with Falcon fans in the past, to be honest. So you're not one of those teams. A lot of people have had their team they don't like. I'm a huge fan of Adrian Claiborne's. I got to be a personal friend of his when he was down here. I think you got a good one up there. So good luck to you guys, and good luck making a run here at the end of the year.
All right, man. Appreciate it. The kind words. And, I was certainly one of those people that thought the Bucs would, figure things out this year and really be a challenger for that NFC South crown. I don't root against the other teams. I enjoy good, tough, physical NFC South games. Obviously I want the Falcons to win, but hopefully the Bucs can get things turned around and get back to making these games a little bit more competitive in the future.
Absolutely. Well, good luck, guys, and have a good rest of the podcast. Thanks for having me on again. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Thanks again, Derek. Have a good night.
Yep. Take care.
All right, guys, that was Derek Fournier, a.k.a. Old School What the Buck podcast. Check it out if you want to get Bucks takes. Maybe you guys enjoy listening to people complain about Dirk Cutter and Mike Smith as Falcon fans. So definitely check that out. And
that's basically what the first 2 years of our show was.
Pretty much, yeah. So you guys might be used to it. All right, let's get into the rest of the show. We're going to talk about this past Saints game. We'll talk more about the upcoming Bucks matchup, and then we'll answer you guys' mailbag questions, all right? So let's talk about this Saints game. Obviously, it's been a couple of days now since the Thursday night matchup. The Falcons won 20-17. They fixed their third down woes. They went 7 for 12 after a really rough game against Minnesota. Really dominated the third downs against the Saints. The Falcons did have 3 turnovers, but that was only converted into 7 points for the Saints, which I think was a big part of why the Falcons were able to roll in this game. Partially that's owed to penalties, partially that's owed to good defense and whatnot. Interesting, the penalties notion, the Saints were penalized 11 times, Falcons only 4. So certainly not the most congruent game as far as officiating goes.
I went back and watched that, though, and the complaint that they have that, the Saints were over-penalized. If anything, the Saints were probably under-penalized. Like, they were... Scott. I mean, there was a holding call on the Lattimore interception. There were quite a few holding calls in their pass protection that were missed. I'm just looking at it. They missed at least 10 calls on the Saints. And, yeah, they might have missed 10 calls on the Falcons, but they were consistent in this game in what they were calling and why they were calling it. And that's what I will say. They were consistent in what they were calling. Whether you like it or not, that's fine. The only one that might have been a little ticky-tack was the roughing the passer call. And even then, it was Ryan threw the ball 2 steps, he got hit. And that's the way the rule's written. There's no other way around it. It was going to get called.
Okay. I don't know. The officiating, it's funny to me, like when the Falcons get a lot of flags, the officiating is awful. When the Falcons don't get a lot of flags, the officiating is good. It's weird how that works out. But we'll see. All right, let's talk about the Falcons, this game in particular. Some of the positive performances from the Falcons. I thought Deion Jones, obviously had a standout game, had the big play at the end of the game, made several other big-time tackles, was flying all over the field, seemingly playing with his hair on fire. going up against his hometown team in the Saints. We also saw positive performances from Devontae Freeman, Julio Jones, Desmond Trufant, among others. Scott, were there any other players that stood out in your eyes in this game?
I mean, Grady Jarrett, but I feel like I say his name every week. Grady Jarrett was just killing it. On offense, Julio Jones, obviously. Mohamed Sanu had a great game. I know Sanu probably won't be considered as having a great game, but he was continually blocking downfield. He was catching the ball when it was thrown to him. I mean, even on the 2 targets that missed him somehow, he still did a good job. So I'd have to throw him in there. And then I thought Vic Beasley played a good game. Even though he didn't really get any sacks, he did get a lot of pressure coming off that edge.
Okay, yeah. Some of the not so great performances. I thought Steve Sarkisian, not a great performance in the sense that the Falcons running backs got 0 targets on the night. That was a disappointing aspect. I don't think Matt Ryan had a great performance. I think part of that is owed to the Saints' pressure. Obviously, Austin Hooper had the prominent drop that turned into interception, which has caused a great lot of criticism of him over the last couple of days, particularly online and whatnot. Certainly not his best performance, but I think, some of that stuff has been a little bit overblown in terms of Hooper. Scott, were there anybody else that you saw that you were like, that game, that they did not perform up to quite the level that I thought they would?
I mean, not really. Just the pass rush in general. I thought they'd be able to create a little more pressure, especially once Pete and Kelemete were completely out for the game. But outside of that, I thought they did a good job. I mean, Breeze is a slippery dude, so it is tough to get sacks on him. But the Falcons actually got, I want to say, 2 sacks on him, and both of them, it was 2 sacks and then a really good pressure by Beasley on the same drive. And one of the sacks didn't count for whatever reason because Breeze barely got it out. But they did a good job pressuring him, getting in his face, especially when it mattered. So I would say just the pass rush outside of maybe like 2 drives, it would have been nice to see more sustained, just hitting him all day kind of pass rush.
Okay. Well, every week on the show, our good friend Evan Birchfield asks us for who we thought the brother of the week was. That goes to someone who is not going to make the headlines but had a good performance. For me, I'm going to pick Ricardo Allen. I think Allen played really well in this game. Had the big hit on Ted Ginn late in the game that sort of was the period on the end of the sentence, but I think he did a really good job throughout this game, playing all over the field and whatnot, and just sort of a testament to really strong play by Ricardo Allen over the last couple of weeks. He's been looking really instinctual and flying all around the field and whatnot to make a big impact in this game. I think this game was a continuation of that.
For me, if I had to pick anybody, it'd be Brooks Reed. I thought he had an excellent game, chasing down screens, just getting after it when he needed to, created pressure when he could. But that, to me, it was Brooks Reed, and he played really well against the run.
As usual. All right, we got a couple of questions about this game. The first one comes from ATL Sports 404. He asks, why did Matt Ryan struggle so much versus New Orleans? Was it something their defense did to take him out of his rhythm, or was it just one of those games?
Just watching the game back multiple times, I don't think there was an exorbitant amount of pressure like what Aaron's saying. I think Ryan was just off. And I think he just wasn't seeing the same kind of windows that he saw against them last year. And it could just be that he hadn't seen that defense since January, and it's now December. And that's, 12 months worth of time that he just hasn't seen this defense. And it's different looks, different coordinator. And that could have been all it really was. And then Lattimore was jamming Julio at the line. There was a couple of things that were causing issues. I do also think that the Saints were getting away with a lot of defensive holding, even though they did get called for it. They were holding guys downfield quite a bit, and Ryan couldn't make them call it every single time. Otherwise, the game was going to like you can't call it every single time because otherwise the thing takes forever.
Okay. I thought a lot of it was the Saints did an effective job moving Ryan off his spot, and he wasn't doing a good job resetting his feet, and he was off target on a couple of throws. I think Cameron Jordan had a pretty strong game. I saw him beat pretty much everybody on our offensive line except for Alex Mack at least once in this game. Ben Garland in particular was a guy that he sort of beat multiple times in this game. I think it was mostly Jordan sort of getting him off his spot. And, that's something that we talked about before with Matt Ryan. Like, if you can get pressure on him early in a game, it can affect the rest of his performance throughout the rest of the game. And I think that was something that the Saints were able to do on a couple of times and led to some missed throws and some poor decisions in this game. But a lot of it, I think, was just, some of those decisions was just Matt Ryan just making dumb decisions and nothing else. Like, throwing the Julio in the end zone at Marcus Williams interception. While I don't disagree with the decision to throw to Julio, the throw that he made was a poor decision, underthrowing him as opposed to throwing it high. The Lattimore pick at the end of the first half, that was a bad decision. I blame Dan Quinn for putting the Falcons in that situation more than I blame Matt Ryan, but there's no excusing that throw in that situation as well. So just a couple of mistakes that he made, some mental errors. I think he was doing a little bit too much, trying to make plays that weren't there. He almost threw a pick to Marvin Hall where he just made a bad throw. He had a pick dropped by Teo that was just him trying to, make an Aaron Rodgers-like play where he's not really capable of making an Aaron Rodgers-like play. So he was out of it. I don't know if it was a short week or whatever the case may be or the pressure or anything, but just one of those games for the most part. He'll have one of these games every now and then. So. ATL Sports 404 asks, should we start to get worried about Dan Quinn's clock management? It didn't come back to bite us versus New Orleans, but the end of the first half was comically bad.
Luckily, the Falcons didn't need to worry about it last year, but this year it feels like his clock management is just really, really atrocious. You could argue that it's part of the reason why the Vikings game was lost. I mean, part of the reason outside of the Vikings just being better, but his clock management does need improvement. I don't know what you do to improve it other than have a guy sit there and, focus on these situations because his gut sucks for these situations right now.
Yeah, I'm not worried about his clock management. He's made some mistakes, certainly, but clock management is not one of those situations that I'd spend too much time worrying about ever. I don't think it's that big a deal. It affects the outcome of a couple of games a year. It doesn't affect the outcome as many as quarterback play, offensive line play calling, run defense, pass rush, those types of things. So I'm not too worried about it. Certainly, I agree with you. It was comically bad. I thought, the end of the first half and then not accepting the penalty at the end of the game was just two egregious mistakes by him. But, it's maybe like 4 of those that he's made in 2 and 3/4 years in Atlanta. So it's not necessarily something that I spend too much time worrying about. It'll probably come up again. It may come up again in a big time game or something like that. And people will make it out to be this huge, massive thing. And it's like, it rears its ugly head every now and then, but it's not necessarily something that I think you have to spend too much time worrying about. I think you should be more concerned about, can the Falcons tackle? Can the Falcons, stop the run? Can, the Falcons find ways to get all their weapons fed on offense as opposed to locking in on 1 or 2 guys and not being able to spread the ball around? Those are the things that you need to be worried about. All right, next question comes from Evan Birchfield. Seeing what you saw on Thursday, how confident are you that this team going to New Orleans? How confident are you in this team going to New Orleans and winning?
I think they can win. I don't think that they're going to go to New Orleans and just dominate them unless, for whatever reason, Kamara's still out. if Kamara's out, I think Atlanta does have a huge advantage. But I'm not confident that they're going to go down to New Orleans and win. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think the Saints are a great matchup for the Falcons in terms of I think the Saints offense is a little one note. I think it's the running backs and Michael Thomas. And I think the Falcons have the defense that can, for the most part, keep that type of offense in check. I don't really respect the Saints defense to the level that I think others do. I think Cameron Jordan's great. I think Marshawn Lattimore's great. I think the rest of the defense is kind of okay. And I think if you can sort of keep those two guys from having a huge impact on the game, then I think you can beat the Saints. So now all that stuff is easier said than done, obviously. Stopping Kamara, stopping Jordan, are things that are tough to do. But I do think, the Falcons can go down to New Orleans and win that game. At this point in time, am I willing to predict that? Not really, because, we're still a week away from that. We'll see how both teams' injury situations are after this upcoming game. The Falcons have a short week going into that game with the Monday night game. So we'll see what happens. Ask me, in a week from now, maybe I'll feel a lot more pessimistic or maybe I'll feel a lot more optimistic. Who knows? But at this point in time, I do feel like that's a winnable game. And we'll see what happens. Brian, at your homie Brian, do you think the referees actually gave us favorable calls versus the Saints? What did you think of the roughing the passer call on Matt Ryan in the second quarter when the announcers both said it was not roughing the passer?
I mean, it was definitely roughing the passer just by rule. It was ticky-tack, but don't go by Chris Collinsworth and what he thinks is roughing the passer or what's a good call or a bad call, because the dude's an idiot. And he has obvious biases for and against certain teams. And you can see it when he calls games. So don't go by what he says. It was legitimately roughing the passer by a rule because they waited 2 beats and then they hit him after he threw the ball. Ryan did kind of flop, if we're being honest here. And I don't know. I do think that it was a bit ticky-tack. It was a bit like, too much by the rule. But I do think it was roughing the passer.
For me, I don't have an issue with the officiating. I never have an issue with the officiating outside of a handful of calls that are ridiculous to me. But my issue is it's just weird to me. It's not necessarily weird, but it just seems a little hypocritical that everybody was harping about how much the refs were against us against Minnesota, and now all of a sudden the officiating in the Saints game was good or not bad or anything like that. It's the same across the board. And so, at least from my perspective, I feel like either you should be complaining about the officiating after Thursday night game, or you should just stop complaining about the officiating overall. It's just one of those things. It's part of the game. The game the rules have gotten way too complicated. It's hard to officiate games now. We've seen that now for a couple of years. And I think the complaining about the officiating on either side is just a crutch for people to blame stuff that just doesn't really matter all that much. The refs miss calls, but they've been literally since the replacement refs came along in 2012, the officiating in the NFL has not been good. And people act like this stuff, it's just a known commodity going into these games that you're not going to necessarily get great officiating. And so the constant complaining about it, and now all of a sudden, because the Falcons were beneficiaries of the officiating, now all of a sudden it wasn't inconsistent. It's just it's the same every single week. This notion that we're victims or any team is a victim of poor officiating or the league is out to get anybody. It's just something that paranoid people make up. It's not a big deal. The officiating was bad in the Minnesota game. The officiating bad was the Saints game. The officiating is bad all the time. It's so bad, it's consistently inconsistent. That's the only thing that's consistent about it. So, I just think people complaining about the officiating in general just needs to stop. All right. With that being said, let's talk about the upcoming Bucs game. Falcons 8-5 going on the road against the Bucs 4-9 on Monday Night Football. Injury-wise, the Falcons' major injuries are Andy Levitre dealing with the tricep injury, probably not going to play, even though they haven't ruled him out officially yet. Tevin Coleman, dealing with a concussion, still in the concussion protocol, probably not going to play, but hasn't been ruled out yet. With the Buccaneers, we already talked about Gerald McCoy with Derek. They also still have Vernon Hargreaves, who's dealing with a hamstring injury. Joe Hawley missed last week with an illness. We'll see if he comes back. They certainly will need him given the injuries they have on the offensive line. TJ Ward is in the concussion protocol as well. Defensive tackle Clint McDonald is dealing with a back injury. So not necessarily your healthiest Bucs team. Scott, what are your thoughts, looking at these injuries, whether it's the Falcons or the Bucs, which one do you think is going to impact the game the most?
I think the injuries that you didn't list on here, which are the Buccaneers missing DeMar Dotson and Ali Marpet, which both played in the first game, and not having Noah Spence or Gerald McCoy. Those are the injuries that impact the game more than anything else. And if they don't have Hargreaves, you might as well just call it a wrap on Julio getting 300 yards because they don't have anybody who can keep up with him at all. Clinton McDonald, he's meh. I don't see anybody who, they're just so banged up all over defense, offense, that they might be out Joe Hawley too. Like the Falcons should be able to create a pass rush. The Falcons should be able to rush the passer. Should be able to stop the pass rush of the Bucs, but a little of it there is. They should be able to run on them all day. They should be able to attack the seams, attack right up the middle, everything. And should be able to, there's just everything they can do. Like, they should have a wide open playbook, be able to attack any seam, anything they want, and just use it as a practice game. Now, whether that happens or not, who knows, because the Falcons like to shoot themselves in the foot a lot. But hopefully we just get a repeat of the first game. Minus anybody getting injured.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the Falcons can create a pass rush. I think, that was the thing coming out of that last game against the Bucs where people were complaining about the lack of pass rush. I think a lot of that had to do with the Bucs sort of having a quick passing game and in that sort of, the injuries in the secondary that the Falcons suffered in that game, opening up things for that quick passing game. But it is interesting when you look at sort of Jameis Winston. He'll be playing this week. He'll be starting this week. He has a 104 career quarterback rating against the Falcons in 4 games. The Falcons have only sacked him 5 times in those 4 games. And so it's one of those things where it's like clearly when the Falcons don't get pressure on Jameis Winston, he has been known to carve up their defense. And it's one of those things, as you say, Scott, with the injuries they're facing up front, the Falcons shouldn't have the problem of creating that pressure. Jameis is not necessarily like a Fitzpatrick, as Derek told us, where Jameis is going to try to do a little bit too much. He's going to try to hang on to the ball, make some plays. That has benefited him in the past against the Falcons because their pass rush has not been up to par, and his willingness to sort of extend plays and take some shots down the field has really hurt the Falcons thanks to his good performances against us. But I think that type of play, given his offensive line issues and given the struggles that the Bucs have had this year offensively, will come back to bite him. And so I do want to see this Falcons pass rush really get after Jameis Winston this week and, have another performance similar to the Cowboys game. Not necessarily in one guy going off, but if we can hit, Jameis Winston 8 to 12 times this week, I think that would be a very good development for the Falcons. I think another big part of this game, as Derek mentioned, is turnovers. The Bucs had 5 turnovers last week against the Lions, but have, for the most part, in the previous games, and maybe that's owed to Ryan Fitzpatrick being the starter for most of those games, they only had 3 combined turnovers in their previous 5 games prior to last week, including none against the Falcons in Week 12. So I do think, for the Bucs' sake, as Derek said, I think they'll have to rely on creating turnovers and hoping that, unlike the Saints, they can, if they can force 3 turnovers, they can take advantage of that and get, 10, 15 or whatever points off of that. And on the other hand, I think the Falcons should have some opportunities as well to create some turnovers with Jameis at the quarterback position. And if they are able to dial up that pressure, then, this game potentially, if the Falcons offense comes to play and they're creating turnovers and they're getting points off of that, this could be, a blowout like we've seen in past years when the Falcons face the Bucs. So we'll see what happens.
To go on that, I do think the Falcons can create a lot of turnovers. One thing I will say is they would have 8 interceptions right now had 4 of them not been called back from penalties. So self-inflicted errors have really called that to happen. Boy. But I do think that Alford, a guy who averages 2 to 3 interceptions a season, is due for one without a penalty. I do think that you are probably going to see a guy like Ricardo Allen, who the last 2 years has had, I think, 3 interceptions. He's got to get one eventually, right? So I think you're going to see these guys create these turnovers, create these picks. Question is, what game does it start? And I have a feeling it's going to start real soon.
Yeah. Obviously, the Falcons' offense had a lot of success against the Bucs. Last time they faced, Julio had the 253-yard gain, 2-touchdown performance in that game. I think a lot of that is owed to the Bucs' very questionable coverages, playing a lot of zone against Julio, giving him free releases and whatnot. Who knows? We talked about this with Derek. Who knows if the Bucs will repeat that same mistake and press. Mike Smith is not necessarily known for his successful adjustments. So we'll see what happens. Also, the Falcons were able to run the ball for nearly 150 yards, and that was without Devontae Freeman in the lineup. He's going to be playing this week. Now, obviously, they may be missing Tevin Coleman, but I think there's little debate that Devontae Freeman is a better running back option, or has been this season, than Tevin Coleman has been. So this could be another sort of breakout performance for Devontae. So everything is favoring the Falcons. It's really sort of hard to see what, other than the Falcons just, being overconfident and having a little bit of a malaise. There has been an issue in the past where I think, maybe, if I'm not mistaken, the Falcons have lost a lot of their games coming off a Thursday night. So maybe they get a little complacent or something like that. But I really do hope, given that we're now in the playoff push, that's not going to be the case. It really is setting up to me to be a game where the Falcons have to lose this game. Otherwise, if they show up and play like their normal selves, they shouldn't have too much issues beating this Bucs team. ATL Sports 404, Falcons have already handled business versus Tampa Bay once this year, but that was with no Jameis Winston. What challenges does he present?
He's a little bit more mobile than your standard quarterback. I don't think he's a great mobile. He's not this like supremely mobile quarterback or anything, but he does kind of run a lot like Cam Newton does, minus the top end speed. And he does have that competitive nature to him that I don't think you'll see with many other quarterbacks. It's just the challenges he presents can also be things in favor. He's really aggressive with his throws. He's really aggressive trying to find holes in the defense. At the same time, those can be huge advantages to the Falcons because he'll take a risk and he'll think a hole's there and it won't be. And you could see a situation where Allen's getting a pick, Alford's getting a pick, Keanu Neal's getting a pick. So he could either really hurt the Falcons or really help the Falcons. It's the Brett Favre syndrome. He's a gunslinger.
Yeah. Jameis is mobile because he's better at avoiding pressure in the pocket, and that's been one of the reasons why the Falcons have not been able to sack him a bunch, is because he's been able to sort of escape the pocket and make plays with his legs, even though he's not necessarily a guy that one 3rd and 19 conversion, infamous 3rd and 19 conversion withstanding. He's not really a guy that you're going to threaten with his legs to make plays on the ground. It's just his ability to avoid pressure and extend plays. And the closest comparison, even though it's not the same, is it's a similar type of play to a guy like Russell Wilson, where he can sort of buy himself some time and do stuff with his arm. The thing with Jameis is he's hot and cold. Like, the player I compared him to when he came out of college, and I think he's lived up to this quite a bit, is Eli Manning. He's a guy that's not necessarily going to be a super efficient quarterback, that guy that's going to make all the right decisions. He'll make some bonehead mistakes from time to time. He'll force some throws because he's trying to do too much. And that's basically the same thing that Eli Manning has done throughout his career in New York. And I think, as we've seen with Eli Manning at various times in the postseason, when he's on his game and he's making those throws and he's, as Scott say, he's being a gunslinger and he's hitting those throws, it's really hard to stop. But there's going to be a lot of games where he's not hitting those throws, and those are being interceptions, and those are being off-target throws, and it's going to be opportunities created for the defense to get off the field and whatnot. And so the issue I think the Bucs have really struggled with this year in particular is their running game has not really balanced it out. We've seen with Eli, when he has a healthy running game, it usually benefits them offensively in New York. And I think that's really what the expectation was for the Bucs this year. And Doug Martin and the company have not lived up to expectations. They may be dead last in the NFL in yards per carry this year, because I know they're like all their running backs are averaging under like 4 yards per carry. So, Jameis is a tough challenge, but I certainly think the Falcons can crack it. Brian at your homie Brian asked, do you think the Falcons versus Bucs will be high-scoring game, close game, or blowout?
Honestly, I think it's going to end up being a blowout for the Falcons, as long as everything hits right and Jameis doesn't go unconscious like he does against the Falcons, and the Falcons finally get a good, bad Jameis game from him, if that makes sense, like a bad one, just a really notoriously awful one from him, because they haven't had one yet. And I think if that happens, this could be ugly. Like 2014 Thursday Night Football, 56-14.
Yeah, I mean, this should be a blowout. But the problem is pretty much every Falcon game this year, except for the Packer game and the Dallas game, has been a one-score game late in the – every win the Falcons have had has been a one-score game late in the fourth quarter. Even the Bucs game a couple of weeks ago was a one-score game with like 3 minutes to go in the game. So, I want to say this should be a blowout because I think it has the makings of being a blowout, because the Falcons are in a better spot and the Bucs are in a worse spot than they were 2 weeks ago. And the Falcons wound up winning that game by 14 points. But at the same time, because the Falcons don't always seem to play up to their potential and have a tendency, particularly on offense, to play down to their opponent's potential a little bit too much this year, I'm not super confident it's going to be a blowout. But for the sake of things, I'll say, yeah, this should be like a 2 or 3 score win for the Falcons. All right, let's get to the call-outs of the week. Scott, you got one from who's been ruffling your feathers this week?
The people that are blaming refs for losses. Specifically the Saints fans who think that a referee that played for the Falcons was calling all the defensive holding in the backfield, the offensive holding in the line, the roughing the passer behind the line. There were like 7 different areas that the flags were coming from, and only one of those could have been that particular ref. And I don't even know which ref it was, but the flags were coming from all over the field. The Saints were floating on their own with their own penalty issues. So can't blame the Falcons for hiring a ref, if you will. And for the most part, referees don't change games that much. It's frustrating to watch things like Vic Beasley get held and choked at the line, basically. Choked from behind while he's trying to attack the quarterback. But those won't always get called. But those don't really affect the game. The bad calls that truly affect the game are probably 1 out of every 100 penalties, turnovers or situations called. Like the Matt Ryan incomplete pass. That's probably the only penalty the entire year for the Falcons that truly impacted
the game. Okay. I thought you had more, Scott.
No, it's just stop blaming the refs for losing. Like, the Falcons just have to play better.
All right. So let's get into the mailbag, and the first question comes from this guy named Scott Karasik. Let's talk about the potential need that the Falcons have at the tight end position. Scott, you have the floor.
I don't think that the issue. I don't think that the issue with the tight end position is Austin. He is exactly what you would be expecting from a second-year tight end. 22, 23 years old. I forgot he turned 23 back in October, but dude's 23 years old. Like, second year in the league, didn't really play a ton in college in a passing set, and he's giving you exactly what you would expect from a second-year tight end. 41 catches, 461 yards. He's on pace for 50-something catches and 550 or so yards. That's exactly what you expect from a second-year tight end. He's not getting the same kind of looks that he would normally, just because normally a tight end should see probably 8, 9 targets a game if they're a top-tier tight end, and he's getting like 5 at most. But that's on him. He's got to get open, and he'll get there. But I think for a guy in the second year, having a guy who's going to be 50 catches, about 575 or so yards, 4 touchdowns, you can't really ask for more than that from a second-year tight end, taken in the third round. Still really low game. I just wish his block. The real need for the Falcons, someone who could block as well as Toilolo, but for whatever reason, just pass catch as that's really because Austin Hooper is a good receiver. Toilolo, he had a guy who can catch the way Austin Hooper does, obviously better hands, but there's going to be work on. We saw Roddy White fix it. Get a guy who can really work with his, really work in there like he did last year. He can have a lot of this because he's running up. And you're going to see the Falcons, and they're going to
Yeah, I think the Austin Hooper stuff is much ado about nothing, as I said earlier. Yeah, he's dropped some passes. I think people acting like it's been a huge problem this year, I think is people making a bigger deal out of a literal handful of plays more than they should. His production is on par with Jacob Tammy's production as a starter last year. And so it's one of those things for a second-year player who's still going to be learning the ropes, who's still developing, who's still building his rapport with Matt Ryan. I mean, that's really going to be the issue with Austin Hooper. Like, he's not necessarily a tight end that's built to win one-on-ones. He's not going to be a guy that you're going to sit there and be like, oh, man, Austin Hooper is going to wreck our safety or he's going to wreck our linebacker. He's more of a guy that's going to win because he's a bigger guy that can win in traffic. That's how he won at Stanford. That's how he's going to win in the NFL. And that takes time to build that because you're going to have the quarterback have the confidence in him to basically throw those passes up for him to go and get like Matt Ryan does with Julio Jones. And that's only developed with Julio Jones over the course of, 4 or 5 years. And it's going to take time for that to develop with Austin Hooper. I agree with you, Scott. I think the Falcons need to upgrade their backup tight end. I think Levine Toilolo, while he's played better over the last month or so, I don't think his play has been really up to par. I think there's been a lot of issues with his blocking throughout the season. And I think that's a position the Falcons potentially want to upgrade. We'll see how much growth Saubert shows next year. I don't expect Saubert to sort of leapfrog Toilolo next year. I don't think that's a realistic expectation. But I do think the Falcons need to look at upgrading that tight end position, whether that's via the draft, whether that's via free agency. But if they can get better play out of their second tight end and get a guy that at the very least is a better blocker, a more reliable blocker than Toilolo, that would be a huge improvement for their ground attack, or if they can get a guy that can be a decent blocker, which is basically what Toilolo is at this point, but also can add some value in the passing game and make teams think a little bit twice about leaving him wide open, which is not really the case with Toilolo. Then I think that would be a huge benefit to the offense as well. So the tight end position is one of the few areas of the roster on offense that I think the Falcons definitely should try to address this offseason, but not in the way of its indicator that I think Austin Hooper's performance this year has been down by any means. So, yeah, I agree with you. Tight end is a potential need, but not necessarily in the way that people think about it. All right. NJ Falcons Ronan at Mave2124 asks, after defensive tackle, our team needs a fullback and blocking tight ends. These are not positions that are drafted earlier than the 7th round, right?
Yeah, if you take just a blocking tight end, but why not take a all-around tight end in the 3rd? Now, fullback I wouldn't take in the draft. I just wouldn't. Honestly, I'd be more open to taking let's use a guy's name here that may not be great, but Aaron Hernandez type fullback. That H-back who can align at fullback and align in the backfield and just kind of be used as a chess piece. As a football player, he's exactly what you want on the field because he could do so many different things. Now, I don't know if that guy's in this draft. I'm looking at these tight ends this year, and I don't see that guy available. But if you can get a guy who can do it all, like they call him Thor from South Carolina in the 3rd round, take him all day.
Yeah, no, I think the Falcons need to upgrade the fullback position. I'm with Scott. I was the originator of the never draft fullbacks theory. So I haven't changed my mind on that one. I don't know if you try to get a free agent or you try to get an undrafted guy, but I do think you got to definitely try to bring in a significant challenger to Derek Coleman, assuming that you bring Derek Coleman back next year, who is a free agent. I think the tight end position also, you do need to, whether you draft it. I mean, the problem is, getting a good blocking tight end is really hard to draft because college teams don't have blocking tight ends that much, typically. And when they do use those guys, they're sort of undraftable sort of talent. But, we'll see what develops. But I do think, at the very least, whether it's fullback or whether it's that second tight end spot, the Falcons do need to try to supplement their blocking with by upgrading one of those 2 spots this offseason at least. And whether it's in the draft or free agency or some other avenue, then so be it. But I don't want to come back to 2018 training camp where it's Austin Hooper, Levine Toilolo, and Derek Coleman as those 3 guys there once again. Evan Birchfield, would you like to see the running backs more involved in the passing game?
Yeah. I mean, that's a given. Why wouldn't I want to see more running backs in the passing game? Freeman, Coleman, they're insanely good receivers, and they're not used enough as it is. I don't know why they're not getting the targets that they used to, but just call a couple running back screens. Really help the offense.
Yeah. I mean, like, we saw a couple of design run pass plays to Coleman in the opening drive of the Vikings game. There was a wheel route that Matt Ryan did not pull the trigger on or didn't see, where Coleman was wide open and probably could have scored a touchdown if Matt Ryan had seen him against the Saints. But other than that, there really wasn't anything that the Falcons that I could see that they drew up for the running backs. So, yeah, I think this is something that the Falcons need to work on. We'll probably see it this week just because it does seem like when there is a public outcry for something that does trickle to Dan Quinn's ears and you see a shift the following week with what they try to do offensively or defensively. So I think we'll see that this week with Freeman. Unfortunately, if Coleman's out, you do lose an asset there because of Coleman's playmaking ability over Freeman's at that in the passing game due to that speed. But yeah, I think hopefully we'll get to see a little bit more of that this week. Andy at Falcons. Andy, which Falcons do you think make the Pro Bowl?
If I had to guess, I'm going to go with Desmond Trufant. Even though his interception total is low, he's shutting people down just like he used to. Grady Jarrett, I do believe that he may not get the votes, but I think when it comes down to it, they'll look at him and be like, this guy's a Pro Bowler. When they throw on his film, the coaches pick their guys. 2.5 sacks on the interior is nothing to sneeze at, and I think by the end of the season, he might add another 1 or 2 to that total as well. I do think we'll see Deion Jones have a shot. I think we'll see Adrian Claiborne have a shot just based on that one game. And then maybe Keanu Neal, just because safety is pretty awful.
My expectation at this point, I think Julio and Mack are probably the only two guys that I would expect. I would be shocked if they didn't make the Pro Bowl. I think Ryan has an outside shot, but I don't think his numbers are quite up to what usually passes muster for Pro Bowl quarterbacks.
I think there'll be war of attrition there, and a lot of guys will just drop out.
Devontae's got a shot just because the Pro Bowl voting starts so early in the season, and earlier this, like 6 weeks ago, he was much higher on the running back stat list than he is now. Like, I think now he's like 18th in rushing yards or something like that. So, those injuries that cause him to miss time certainly won't help his chances, but hopefully he'll get in due to a strong early push. I don't expect Grady Jarrett to make it. He just doesn't have the sack numbers that you need to make the Pro Bowl. Claiborne has a shot just because of that game, that Dallas game, but it was so late in the season. I don't know if it's enough to push him in, but he's got a shot. Deion Jones, I think, has a shot just because of high tackle numbers, and maybe this Saints game gave him a little bit of a push. Trufant, I would be shocked if he made it, but it would be crazy because he's had some of his best games in prime time, and so I think more people may be a little bit aware of how good he is than they probably normally would be just looking at the interception totals. I don't expect Keanu Neal to make it just because he doesn't have enough interceptions, and the Pro Bowl voting is stupid when it comes to safeties because only 4 safeties make the team. So, yeah, I think Julio and Mack are probably the two likeliest guys. I think Freeman probably is the next best option. Maybe Matt Bryant as well. I think he's probably got an outside shot. So, yeah, I don't think the Falcons are going to have a bunch of Pro Bowlers this year like they did last year. I think you're going to see a bunch of Rams. You're going to see a bunch of Eagles, and maybe like 2 or 3 Falcons. All right, Jason at your boy J94 asks, should we be more concerned about the Saints or the Panthers moving forward? It seems like we match up better with the Saints in their pass-happy offense.
What was the question?
Should we be more worried about the Saints or Panthers moving forward?
Probably the Panthers, because I think the Falcons match up better with the Saints when the Saints don't have Kamara. But if the Saints get Kamara back, I'd be way more worried about it.
I'm worried about the Panthers just because their defense is better. And the issue the Falcons have had this year more often than not has been when they face good defenses, they lose games. Any defense is good. And like the Saints defense, I know statistically is good, but I don't have a ton of respect for that defense outside, as I said earlier, Jordan and Lattimore. I think the Panthers, we know what the Panthers defense is. We've seen them for many, many years. They have probably the best linebacker core in the entire league. Their secondary is much better than people give it credit. And of course, their defensive line has been pretty good over the years. So, yeah, I think the Panthers are the tougher matchup for the Falcons at this point, and we'll see what happens. ATL Sports 404. I've kind of struggled with figuring out exactly what Vic Beasley is. Best at strong side linebacker, sub-package defensive end, full-time defensive end. Can he still be the pass rusher we were hoping when we were hoping we were getting when we drafted him?
I think long-term he's a Leo. As he continues to add more weight, I think that's going to be where he finally ends up. And he's still a little bit of a project, even though it feels like there was a role notched out for him last year, and it says keep him in that same role. But when they try to keep him in that same role this year, teams were keying on it. So you got to figure out the best way to use him. He does well standing up, and I do think the Falcons are going to run a lot more 3-4 looks because they do have Beasley, because they do have Campbell. But right now, I do think his best position is probably strong side linebacker and base, roll in at defensive end in the sub.
No, look, I think Vic's role is a linebacker. I think that's what he is. He's Bruce Irvin. That's what he is. I know everybody wants him to be something much greater than that, but that's kind of what he is. Now, I'm not saying that, he'll be Bruce Irvin in the sense that he only gets 6 sacks a year or whatever Irvin gets, but like that's basically what his role is going to be for moving forward. Hopefully he's Bruce Irvin, but he gets double-digit sacks most years. I don't think that people should have any problem with it. I think the fact that the Falcons are carving out a role for him in the base defense, I think is a smart way of utilizing it. I think he's one of the best athletes on the team, and to not use that because people have an inflated expectation on how good a pass rusher he is, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think he's a better Sam linebacker, or has been a better Sam linebacker over the last 6 or so games than Devondre Campbell was in the first 8. I think he's got a bright future ahead of him, and I think people are panicking a little bit because his sack totals are down this year, which people should have expected going into the season. His pressure totals are just fine. Since he's moved to strong side linebacker, his pressure rate has been basically the same as it was last year. It's just he's not converting as many of those in sacks, likely due to the fact that he's not facing a whole bunch of bad right tackles anymore. He's facing a lot better competition. So he's not, maybe if we get a chance to go up against the Rams in the postseason, maybe he'll get that 4-sack game that everybody's waiting for or whatever. Maybe if we trade Ty Sambrailo and he winds up getting scooped up by the Eagles or something like that, then, maybe he'll get that 3-sack game that everybody's hoping for. But and to the meantime, I think Vic Beasley's role in this team has been fine. And I don't think anybody should be frustrated or concerned about what he's been doing, because he's been playing good football the last 6 weeks. ATL Sports 404 asks, doesn't it seem like Duke Riley has played much? I can't read. I'm sorry, guys. Doesn't seem like Duke Riley has played much since returning from his injury. Are Falcons trying to bring him along slowly, or do you think they're just comfortable with current play of the starters at linebacker?
I think it's more that they're comfortable with the current starters at linebacker, and they're cool with bringing him along slowly because he kind of needs it a little bit more.
Yeah, this was weird to me. Him with the Falcons playing as much base as they did against the Saints on Thursday, for him not to get a single snap on defense was a surprise. So I don't necessarily know. My guess is that the guys, the Ishmaels of the world, have played well. I think Beasley has played well in Duke Riley's absence at linebacker. My guess is that the Falcons are rewarding Kamal Ishmael with solid performances in practice all year long and giving him more reps. And because Duke Riley, wasn't necessarily knocking out the park early in the season, they're not necessarily in a rush to get him maximum number of reps going down the stretch and just sort of resign to him being a special teams guy. We'll see if that changes in the next couple of games, but that's what it seems like. Next question is, what has been your opinion on DeMonte Casey this year?
Casey's been very solid. I was kind of shocked at how he was seeing as much playing time as he was, but I've been enjoying watching him play. I think he's a good special teamer, and I think when he's in there at safety, he does a solid enough job to where you're allowed to have Allen move down to the slot.
Yeah, I think Casey's did a solid job in the 3 safety looks that they've been doing when he's got the opportunity for extended reps due to injuries. He's done a capable job that you would expect out of a guy that's converting to a brand new position. and is a rookie and is a 5th-round pick. He's done a more than solid job there. The biggest issue he has to go moving forward, he's got to clean up his tackling a little bit, but for the most part, he's been good in run support. His biggest issue is, his instincts aren't quite there playing that single high role, and that's to be expected, again, because he's converting positions and he's never really played that role. He's much better, or has proven to be much better this year when he plays closer to the line of scrimmage, which makes perfect sense. When you don't have, when you're a safety, playing close to the line of scrimmage is a little bit easier than playing far away from it. You have to cover more space. So, in time, as he gets more reps, I think he'll continue to look good and continue to improve. And I've been impressed with his performance so far this year. My expectation going into the season was he would just sort of be inactive for half the season and play special teams for the other half of the season. But the fact that he's getting, a handful of reps every single week in those 3 safety looks, I think is a promising development. All right, last question from ATL Sports 404 asks, this may go a little under the radar, but I thought Ben Garland had a solid game stepping in for Andy Levitre. Based on what he put on tape versus New Orleans, are you confident he can continue to be solid if Levitre needs a little more time to heal? And we got a question from Dean Sabrizi, similar, asking about what we thought of Ben Garland's performance in replacement for Levitre.
I thought Garland did a solid job in replacement for Levitre. He's a good football player. He's not the same kind of football player. He's not the same kind of wily veteran. But he is a very intelligent, strong football player. He's a good run blocker, but his pass protection he was having issues with pass protection, but he was going against Cam Jordan. So I'm going to kind of grade him on a curve there and say he had a good game.
Yeah, no, I think, relatively speaking, given that he was facing Cam Jordan a bunch, and the expectation is that Cam Jordan, who's probably one of the 3 or 4 front runners, or should be at least one of the 3 or 4 front runners for Defensive Player of the Year, he was going to get beat by him, and he got beat by him multiple times. So that was somewhat to be expected. I think other than those matchups against Cam Jordan, I thought Garland did a pretty good job. It wasn't a great performance by Garland. It wasn't necessarily, for a lot of people that are like, let's bench Wes Schweitzer and put Ben Garland in there. I don't think Garland did enough to make that a thing as much, at least this week. We'll see what he does against Tampa Bay, especially now that Gerald McCoy's out. But yeah, I think it was a solid performance. I'm not too worried about that left guard spot with Levitre out, presumably for another game or 2. Hopefully he comes back by week 17. And in the meantime, I think Garland's going to do a fine job. And if the Falcons are forced to play a playoff game with him in that starting lineup, I'm not necessarily going to be quivering with fear over that. But certainly, I'd like to see Andy Levitre come back and see what he can do. All right, guys, that is it for the show tonight. We apologize for the technical difficulties earlier in terms of not being able to do the live broadcast and see your responses live on Facebook and YouTube, but you can certainly check us out next week on both of those platforms. As always, you can follow us on Facebook at Falcon Central Radio. On YouTube, check out Pro Football Central's channel. You can also check out ProFootballCentral.com. Of course, the show's Twitter handle is FalconsPFC. You can send in those mailbag questions using the hashtag FalconsMailbag, either at that Twitter handle. My Twitter handle is FalcFans. Scott is Karasik S. Always be sure to follow PF Central on Twitter as well. And we will be back next week to talk about the upcoming Monday night game between the Falcons and Bucs, as well as we will be previewing the upcoming matchup against the rematch against the